I never thought a simple trip to a restaurant could leave me so vulnerable. But that day, as I pushed my wheelchair through the narrow hallway, I felt a chill that didn't come from the air conditioning. It was the weight of human contempt. Every glance I met seemed to pierce my skin, reminding me of past battles that, in a way, had prepared me for the worst. But not for this. When I reached the door, I heard a low, almost imperceptible comment that made my heart clench. Another one of those veterans thinking they're important. I didn't know if it was me, but the feeling of isolation was immediate. The air felt dense, as if every molecule conspired against me, preventing me from simply existing in that space. I pushed the chair back slowly, feeling the tires squeak against the cold floor, and tried to maintain my posture, even though each movement carried years of pain and invisible scars. The waiter, a young man who barely glanced at me, crossed his arms and said with a sarcastic half-smile, "We don't have time to wait here. You can find another place." Shock hit me like a wave. I, who had faced armed enemies and survived the chaos of war, was being ignored within the four walls of a busy restaurant, a place that theoretically should have been safe. My stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the weight of injustice. As I stood there, hesitating whether to leave or persist, I noticed the stares. People at the tables whispered, some casting pitying glances, others indifferent. My heart sank. A veteran should be greeted with respect, right? But there, in that moment, I was nothing more than an old man in a wheelchair, invisible to everyone. And then, something inside me ignited a silent flame. I couldn't just disappear, not after everything I'd been through. I gripped the edge of the nearest table tightly and took a deep breath. Every muscle in my body remembered the discipline, the courage, the persistence. I didn't need their approval, but I needed to show that every scar, every medal, carried a weight that could not be ignored. It was at that moment that I decided that no one, absolutely no one, would underestimate my story. Not that waiter, not the customers, not fate. And little did I know that what would happen next would completely change everyone's perception, revealing that behind my weary body lay a lifetime of sacrifice, courage, and honor that could never be erased. My name is James, and for decades I served my country in territories where danger was constant and death seemed to whisper my name at every turn. I joined the army as a young man, carrying with me dreams of heroism and justice. But I quickly discovered that war is not about easy glory. Each day was a test of endurance, each mission a dance between life and death. I clearly remember a sunny morning in the desert, where the heat was almost unbearable and the silence piercing. Sitting on the hot sand, surrounded by wounded comrades and distant explosions, I felt the weight of every choice I had ever made. War shapes a man cruelly, transforming innocence into experience and hope into a silent need for survival. After years of combat, I returned home with medals on my chest and scars on my soul. Society imagined that upon my return, I would be welcomed as a hero, but the reality was different. Civilian life required me to fight in new ways, against oblivion, against prejudice, against the indifference of those who couldn't understand what I'd experienced. And on that fateful morning in the restaurant, all those memories came flooding back. I wasn't just there to eat, I was there to feel part of a world that sometimes seemed to have forgotten me. Every movement of the wheelchair was a reminder of past battles, of the times I'd had to rise despite the pain, of the nights when the silence of the battlefield was crueler than any sound. I sat for a few moments at the entrance, breathing deeply, inhaling the smell of coffee, fresh bread, and cold metal of the restaurant. It was familiar and at the same time alien. A reflection of my own life, straddling different worlds, trying to find my place. Memories of the past and the present intermingled, and I knew I needed to maintain my dignity, even if no one else saw my worth. Every step of my journey taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. I carry with me the faces of lost friends, the echoes of explosions, cold, heat, hunger, and thirst. But I also carry honor, resilience, and an unbreakable sense of justice that could not be ignored. In that restaurant, in that moment, I was just James, an elderly man in a wheelchair. But inside, I was the same soldier who had faced sandstorms, gunfire, and impossible losses. And I was determined that everyone there would realize that my story, my life, and every medal I had earned, even the invisible ones, carried weight and deserved respect. The situation began to escalate as soon as I tried to place my order. The waiter, who seemed born to ignore others, looked at me with a look that mixed disdain and impatience. His words, cold as ice, cut through the air around me. "Sir, we have a line. Maybe another day." I took a deep breath, feeling every muscle tense. The wheelchair felt like it weighed tons, and each push on the cold floor was a physical reminder that I had no space there, no importance. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining control in the face of such injustice. The restaurant was full, but no one seemed to notice my presence. Loud conversations, laughter, the sound of silverware against plates, all of it enveloped me like an invisible wall. Each laugh seemed to silently mock me, as if I were just another forgotten old man trying to exist in a world that doesn't recognize sacrifice. I looked around and noticed a family preparing to eat. Small children giggled, oblivious to the tension in the room. A woman called the waiter, smiling and waving, and he immediately attended to her. It was at that moment that I realized the true depth of the indifference. It wasn't just about food or service, it was about value. The realization that my story, my past, my struggles, meant nothing to those who had never faced the horror of war. I tried to remain calm, remembering everything I'd been through. Every impossible mission, every night spent on vigil, every lost comrade. I'd survived it all, and now I was being disrespected by a simple gesture of disregard. The conflict wasn't physical, but emotional and moral. It was a silent battle between dignity and humiliation. When the waiter returned, he gave me another look, this time more direct, almost challenging. "Sir, if you want to order something, you'll have to wait. Or would you rather leave?" The choice was clear. Accept the humiliation or resist, even knowing it could bring more public shame. It was at that moment that the tension reached its peak. My heart was pounding, my hands gripped the arms of my chair, and anger mixed with sadness flooded me. I wanted to scream, to explain my story, to show every scar, every medal, every moment of courage that defined my life. But the words stuck in my throat. And that's when I realized the real challenge wasn't the waiter, the customers, or the restaurant. The real conflict was with the world that insists on ignoring those who gave everything for something greater. It was about proving silently that even aged, tired, and ignored, I still had value, honor, and a story that could not be forgotten. The tension in the air was palpable. Each second seemed to stretch into endless minutes, and the decision I made next would determine whether I would remain invisible or finally show the world that, behind the wheelchair and the aging body, there was a veteran who could never be underestimated. The moment of humiliation began almost imperceptibly, but soon became overwhelming. As I stood there, motionless in my wheelchair, trying to maintain my dignity, I noticed some customers beginning to whisper. Looks of curiosity, pity, and worse, contempt turned toward me. A man at the next table let out a low laugh, accompanied by a comment that cut through the space like a cold blade. "Look, the old man wants attention. How sad." My hands tightened on the arms of my wheelchair, feeling the cool wood against my skin. Every laugh, every whisper, felt like an invisible battle. I, who had survived explosions, endless nights of combat, the loss of friends who would never return home, was being reduced to an object of ridicule in a restaurant. The waiter, sensing an opportunity to assert his authority, approached slowly, almost theatrically, as if each step reinforced his power over me. With a forced smile and a voice thick with condescension, he said, "Sir, perhaps you'd better look elsewhere. We don't want any trouble here." I felt anger rise along with the pain. It wasn't just the refusal of service, but the way my presence was treated as insignificant. Every word, every gesture, every look became a cruel reminder that, for those who have never faced what I have, courage is worthless. And then came the height of humiliation. A group of young men began making sarcastic comments about veterans, gesturing and laughing loudly, unaware or uncaring of the impact of their words. "Look at the hero here. All that's missing is the cape," one of them said, laughing. The silence that followed in my mind was absolute. The world seemed to stand still for a moment, leaving only the awareness of the contempt surrounding me. Every sound, every laugh, every comment was a cruel reminder that the war I had fought for decades earned no respect outside the battlefield. The wheelchair became a symbol of vulnerability in the eyes of everyone there. But even at the height of humiliation, something inside me remained unshakable. The certainty that my worth didn't depend on the perception of others. As the gazes pierced me, I began to recall the faces of lost friends, of comrades who had entrusted their lives to me. I thought of every impossible mission, every explosion, every night of fear and vigilance. And I realized that, although physically vulnerable in that moment, my story was a weapon no one could take from me. The public humiliation only served to strengthen my resolve. I might be underestimated, ignored, ridiculed, but I still had one last trump card, something no one expected. Something that would reveal unexpectedly that every scar, every medal, and every story of courage carried real weight, a weight no one could deny. The entire restaurant, unbeknownst to them, was about to witness the turning point that would change not only their perception of me, but also their awareness that honor and courage cannot be ignored or diminished by ignorance or disdain. It was at that moment, when all seemed lost and the humiliation reached its peak, that I decided it was time to show everyone who I truly was. With steady hands, though trembling from the effort of holding myself in the wheelchair, I reached for my coat and carefully opened it slightly. A medal gleamed in the restaurant's light, its metallic sheen cutting through the air thick with indifference. Silence fell over the place. The whispers and laughter instantly ceased, replaced by looks of surprise, shock, and disbelief. It was more than a medal. It was the symbol of a lifetime dedicated to courage, sacrifice, and honor. Those same young people who had been laughing seconds before now shrank back in their chairs, unable to hide the shock of what they saw. The waiter, who had previously exuded arrogance, froze, his words stuck in his throat. I could feel his eyes, and those of all the other customers, fixed on me. And for the first time in that restaurant, I felt my worth recognized. Not because I demanded it, but because the truth is impossible to ignore. With the medal on display, I briefly told my story, my voice firm but charged with emotion. This medal is not just a piece of metal. It is the memory of nights when my companions and I faced dangers you can't even imagine. It is proof that every scar, every loss, and every moment of fear had a purpose. Some still tried to hide their surprise. Others couldn't take their eyes off me. I didn't need applause, but I could feel the respect growing in the air. Those seemingly endless minutes became a silent lesson for everyone. Courage, sacrifice, and honor are not measured by what you see on the outside, but by what you experience on the inside. A woman watched me from the next table, her eyes shining with unshed tears. An older man, sitting alone, bowed slightly, as if silently apologizing for all his previous disdain. Even the young men, who had previously been laughing, looked away, somehow understanding that something bigger than themselves was happening there. The atmosphere shifted almost palpably. Arrogance gave way to reflection. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to demand anything. All it took was revealing a fragment of my story for the weight of the truth to settle in everyone's minds. And in that moment, I realized that the turning point wasn't just in how they saw me, but in how I saw myself. The humiliation had served as a catalyst. I, who thought my life of sacrifice could be ignored, was now standing, albeit seated in my chair, feeling that my story had finally found its place, even if only for a few minutes, in the hearts of people who had previously ignored it. It was a silent but powerful lesson. Never underestimate those who carry invisible battles. Never ignore the weight of a life of courage, even when it appears in a wheelchair, in an ordinary restaurant, on any given day. And I, a war veteran, was there to prove that even in the darkest moments, honor finds its way. The medal's impact wasn't limited to looks of surprise, it transformed the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. People who had previously ignored me began to approach, some discreetly, others with a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. The waiter, previously gruff and indifferent, took a hesitant step toward me, his face brimming with confusion and regret. "Sir, I didn't know," he began, but the words failed him. No apology was enough to erase the disregard I'd felt, but I could feel respect finally emerging, albeit belatedly. A man at the next table, who had been mocking me with sarcastic comments minutes earlier, leaned over and said softly, "Sorry, I had no idea." His words were simple, but they conveyed the knowledge that I deserved recognition, not pity. An older woman seated at a nearby table slowly approached. With a sincere smile, she extended her hand. "Thank you for your service. We must never forget." His voice carried the weight of someone who understood. And in that instant, I felt an unexpected connection. It wasn't just about me. It was about every invisible veteran who had faced the world without credit or honor. As I spoke briefly about my experiences, I told of missions that demanded more than courage. Of lost friends, of the biting cold and hunger, of the feeling that each day could be my last. And I realized I didn't need applause. All I needed was for someone to understand, for someone to recognize the value of what I'd experienced. The entire restaurant seemed to have shifted in energy. Those who had laughed and whispered before were now silent, watching with a mixture of respect and reflection. A few staff members approached discreetly, offering apologies and small tokens of gratitude. A young waiter, still hesitant, served my meal with care and reverence, each gesture charged with a new understanding of honor and sacrifice. But true justice wasn't just in the outward recognition. It was in the feeling that settled within me. The anger and frustration I'd felt moments before gave way to a sense of quiet triumph. I had been ignored, humiliated, disrespected. And yet, I remained steadfast, allowing the truth of my life to speak for itself. The conversations around me became more respectful. People near my tables began to quietly discuss the true meaning of courage and sacrifice. Some even mentioned that if they encountered a veteran on the street, they should treat them with respect, not indifference. Every gesture, every look, every word revealed that the perception of me and my story had radically changed. As I took a deep breath, feeling my heart finally calm, I realized that justice isn't always immediate, but it finds its way. A simple gesture, showing my medal, was enough to restore the respect I had been denied, not just in that restaurant, but in every space where stories like mine are forgotten. And in that moment, with attentive and respectful eyes all around me, I realized that my life of sacrifice had not been in vain. Recognition had arrived, belated but real. And the impact of this silent justice would, I hope, resonate with every person present, reminding them that honor and courage cannot be erased by ignorance or contempt. As the environment around me shifted, something deeper was happening within me. It wasn't just the recognition of others, it was a silent reconciliation with myself. Every memory of the war, every loss, every fear, and every victory came flooding back, mingling with the present, creating an almost palpable emotional current. I remembered the endless nights on patrol, the heavy silence that preceded an ambush, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as every decision could mean life or death. I remembered the faces of friends who would never return home, the letters that were never delivered, the promises we made to each other before leaving. The medal that now gleamed on my chest was more than a piece of metal. It was the echo of all those moments, all those people, all that accumulated pain and courage. As I reflected, I felt tears well up in my eyes. Not tears of weakness, but tears of remembrance, of understanding that my life, despite everything, had meaning. The weight of humiliation, the tension of conflict, all of it transformed into something almost cathartic. Every breath carried memories of lost comrades, of impossible missions, of nights when hope seemed non-existent. I looked at the restaurant and saw the contrast between the civilian world, with its trivialities and worries, and the intensity of my own life. Outside, the city continued on, oblivious to the magnitude of what I had been through. But inside, the truth could not be ignored. My story was etched in every line of expression on my face, in every invisible scar I bear, in every restrained movement of my wheelchair. And suddenly, I felt a quiet peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes with the absence of conflict, but the peace that arises when someone finally acknowledges their truth. Every look of respect, every gesture of understanding, every small reaction from those present became a reminder that my life of sacrifice had not been in vain. In that moment, I realized that the deep emotional connection was not only between myself and others, but also between myself and my own story. I understood, almost tangibly, that war, despite all the pain, shaped me not only as a soldier, but as a human being. Every trauma, every loss, and every victory had prepared me to face not only enemies in battle, but also the indifference and ignorance of the civilian world. As the restaurant continued to observe me in respectful silence, I realized that my journey, marked by courage and sacrifice, had reached a point of reflection. Past and present intertwined, and I finally understood that, while I couldn't control how others treated me, I could control how my story impacted the world around me. The medal wasn't just proof of my past, it was a symbol of resilience, of memory, of humanity. And in that moment, with all the mixed emotions, I felt that, even amidst the indifference and humiliation, the emotional connection I had established with my own life and with those who finally recognized my worth was more powerful than any conflict, any contempt, or any pain. Despite the growing recognition, there was still a tension in the air that seemed to cut through the room like an invisible blade. I knew the story I'd revealed wouldn't immediately erase the contempt and judgment I'd faced. There were still doubtful looks, whispers trying to rationalize the impact of what they just witnessed, and above all, the feeling that at any moment something could shatter this fragile calm. As my hand rested on the edge of the wheelchair, I felt my heart pounding, as if each pulse measured not only my life, but the reaction of the world around me. A young man, who had previously been openly mocking, approached hesitantly. He looked at the medal, at my eyes, and finally said, his voice low and almost trembling, You really went through all that?" The intensity of that moment hit me like a silent explosion. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been underestimated, ignored, or humiliated. I could feel every breath around me. The weight of judgment, curiosity, disbelief, and finally, reverence slowly growing. That's when I realized the most dramatic moment hadn't yet passed. A sarcastic comment emerged, seemingly from someone trying to regain their superiority. "So, you want everyone to feel sorry for you now?" The words were spoken with disdain, but for me they represented a final test, a silent challenge, to maintain dignity in the face of provocation and prove that my life of sacrifice was greater than any malicious comment. I took a deep breath, feeling every muscle in my body remember the lessons learned in combat: control, patience, courage. And then I spoke, calmly but firmly, conveying the intensity of each moment. It's not about pity. It's about truth, about what I faced, and about the respect everyone deserves, even when forgotten or underestimated. The silence fell again, deeper and heavier. Every person present seemed to absorb every word, every gesture, every nuance of the emotion I carried. There was no ignoring the depth of what I was revealing. The tension reached its peak, and I realized that the climax was not a physical confrontation or an overt act of heroism, but the proof that a lifetime of integrity and courage could defy any ignorance. As tears welled up discreetly in my eyes, I felt the weight of war, humiliation, and redemption converge in that instant. The climax was silent but devastating. A veteran, old and wheelchair-bound, had transformed public scorn into recognition, doubt into respect, and indifference into admiration. And in that moment, I realized that the ultimate tension lay not in fear, pain, or humiliation, but in the courage to stand firm, to maintain dignity in the face of adversity, and to show that a lifetime story cannot be erased by prejudice, ignorance, or disdain. After the climax, the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift, almost imperceptibly but significantly. What had previously been tense silence and suspicious glances now became a space of respect and reflection. The people who had ignored or ridiculed me were visibly touched by what they had just witnessed. It was a silent but powerful shift, and I felt its impact in every fiber of my being. The waiter, who had previously exuded arrogance, approached again, this time with humility. His words were simple but carried the sincerity of regret. "Sir, I apologize for how we treated you. It was wrong, very wrong." I simply nodded, needing no further explanation. Recognition had arrived, and that was enough. As I observed the reactions around me, I realized that the experience had affected not only those present, but myself as well. There was a sense of liberation, as if the accumulated weight of years of silence and invisibility had been partially lifted. Humiliation, contempt, and conflict became learning experiences, and I understood that every battle, whether on the battlefield or in civilian life, carries with it a lesson in resilience. A young man approached me shyly and said, "Sir, thank you for serving our country. I'd never thought about what veterans go through." His gaze was one of genuine understanding, and in that moment, I realized my story had touched something deeper than simple curiosity. It was inspiring awareness and respect. As my meal finally arrived, I felt something had shifted within me as well. The outside world would remain a place of challenges, but the experience of that day had strengthened my own confidence and sense of dignity. I realized that justice and recognition do not depend on time or immediate understanding, but on the truth that remains, firm and unshakable, in the face of any disdain. The restaurant, now silent and attentive, became the scene of a small personal victory. Every gesture of respect, every understanding look, every word of recognition was proof that, even after decades of service, sacrifice, and oblivion, my life and experiences had meaning. As I left the restaurant, pushing my wheelchair back onto the sidewalk, I felt a mixture of relief and gratitude. Life as a veteran remains full of challenges, but the knowledge that my story had impacted those around me brought a sense of completeness. I had transformed a moment of scorn into a lesson in honor, courage, and respect. And as I looked up at the sky above, I felt that every battle, every loss, and every scar had finally found its purpose. The outcome of that experience wasn't just external, it was internal, silent, and powerful. I had faced humiliation, revealed my truth, and received justice that, though belated, was invaluable. As I left the restaurant, still feeling the warmth of recognition and the weight of the past, I realized that the true lesson of that day went far beyond simple respect for a veteran. It spoke to the essence of humanity, to how we often ignore the worth and history of those around us, judging them by their appearance or their current circumstances. The medal I displayed was not just an object. It was a symbol of the memory of every lost friend, every battle faced, and every difficult choice that life and war forced upon me. War, I thought, is not just the confrontation with visible enemies. It continues even afterward, in the streets, in the indifferent glances, and in the small injustices of everyday life. A veteran doesn't stop fighting when he returns home. He continues to face invisible battles, forgetfulness, disrespect, indifference. Each gesture of recognition is a small victory, but also a reminder that the world is often blind to the sacrifice of others. As I pushed my wheelchair down the sidewalk, I remembered all the comrades who never had the chance to be seen, heard, or remembered. They couldn't show their medals, their stories, their lives of courage. And I realized that part of my responsibility as a survivor was to carry these stories with me to make them visible, reminding everyone that every life of sacrifice has value and deserves to be honored even when no one seems to pay attention. Moral, then, lies not only in public recognition, but in the awareness that dignity and courage cannot be underestimated. They exist even when invisible. And often, justice comes not through applause or words, but through the silent revelation of the truth. That moment in the restaurant showed that, although the world can be cruel and inattentive, the truth remains and has the power to transform perceptions, even if only for an instant. I also reflected on how quickly we judge others without understanding their stories, their pain, and their sacrifices. Each person carries battles that are not visible to the naked eye. The medal on my chest symbolized my story, but it also symbolized all the forgotten stories. Humanity often fails to see silent heroism, and that is precisely why acts of recognition, even small ones, have a profound impact. And finally, I understood that the darkest and truest lesson is this: courage and honor do not depend on applause or immediate recognition. They exist, persist, and resonate even in indifference. The life of a veteran, or of anyone facing invisible challenges, cannot be measured by the gaze of others, but by the silent weight of their choices, their sacrifices, and their integrity. I left that restaurant with a sense of mission accomplished, not for having changed the entire world, but for having reminded everyone there, and myself, that every life of sacrifice carries immeasurable value, that even in indifference, courage finds its way, that even in darkness, truth shines and, when revealed, transforms even the most closed hearts. And so, I left the restaurant knowing that the war continues, but also that every gesture of recognition, every look of respect, and every reflection on the life of another human being can make a difference. May we never underestimate those who carry invisible battles. May we never forget the value of courage, sacrifice, and humanity. Because, in the end, this is what defines the true greatness of a life. Not what we see, but what we endure, carry, and honor in silence.